Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm Dan Leonard. I'm the executive director of We Work for Health, and we're thrilled to be hosting this event today and releasing some original research that you'll hear about in a moment that We Work and a few partners with us put out, and you're going to hear from Dwayne Schultes about that original research on the impact of the IRA, but more specifically, the impact of what we call in shorthand the 9 to 13 provisions of the IRA. Uh, and you'll hear some kind of traumatic impacts of the 9 to 13 in the IRA, but also a solution, a very common sense solution that's been put forward. It's called the EPIC Act. So this is really going to focus on the EPIC Act, and we are just thrilled to have a panel that we'll hear from, but also the prime sponsor and the leader of the EPIC Act is with us, and we're going to hear from Congressman Davis in a moment. We also have a welcome from his colleague from North Carolina, Mr. Murphy, who is the sponsor on the EPIC Act as well. So we're going to hear from Congressman Davis, and then we're going to have a little panel. Then we'll have the research presentation by Dwayne, and then we're going to have a panel conversation from our panelists who really represent the kind of the investment community, the seniors who should be benefiting from the IRA, and some of this evidence that you'll see today is that is not exactly the case. And then I'm going to speak a little bit more about the impacts on the small molecule. So you'll hear small molecule a lot today, so we'll dig into that. So just in the 2 years since the IRA's passage, there have been a lot of unintended consequences of that legislation, and they're starting to reveal themselves. The pill penalty is kind of chief among them, in my opinion, which is, cuts in the biopharmaceutical investment really disproportionately impacting small molecule. These are your pills and your tablets, which are the preferred mode of mechanism for seniors and for any patient, really, over injectables, which are the large molecules. So you'll hear more about that later in the discussion. We are releasing some critical research that you'll hear about today. But let's start off right at the top with our guest of honor, Congressman Don Davis from North Carolina, the chief sponsor of the EPIC Act.
Let's give it up to Dan, his panel that's here today. We work for health, right?
We do.
Huh?
Every day.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I was coming in, Dan, and I think I passed up all of the most healthy foods, but I got those chocolate chip cookies there, and it was good, I'm telling you. How's everybody doing? We're so grateful to see you today, and thank you for attending this very important panel. Don Davis, I represent North Carolina's 1st Congressional District. And let me really set the stage. North Carolina's 1st District, Eastern North Carolina, 22 counties. 100% of my counties are deemed by our state rural, the largest geographic congressional district in North Carolina. But above that, I tend to see some of the most challenging healthcare situations. From birth to death. We deal with so many complex issues. We see and tend to experience some of the highest healthcare disparities, from infant mortality, dealing with chronic illnesses, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, all the way to, and we've seen these figures from our healthcare administrators. If you live in Eastern North Carolina as opposed to other parts of the state, our life expectancy is actually lower. So when I came to Congress, and not only before coming to Congress, I can just tell you that I served in the North Carolina Senate, as mayor of my hometown, and we've dealt with so many healthcare issues and policy issues over the years. So in coming here, and I just want to put the perspective on this, I remember still being interviewed by the media. And they said, what is it that you want to work on? What are you going to focus on? And obviously, you come to have so many focus in issues you want to focus on. But when I think about it and put it into perspective, while my constituents may want me to work on so many issues, there's no way we can escape dealing with health because it's such an important topic for us. So I want to say preserving innovation is near and dear to my heart. When I think of North Carolina, the second leading cause of death, cancer. Just by a show of hands, how many of us are family members, households, we know someone? I mean, look at this. Everybody in the room. Second leading cause of death. And when we begin to put all of this in perspective, it is clear that we must continue to preserve innovation. Why? Because innovation saves lives, period. It's helping someone that we may not know or put a face or the name of. But if we look at just this room here, how we've all been impacted is helping our neighbors and our friends. Investment, without any doubt, drives cures. There is a link, there's an impact. And we have to always be aware of that. And that's why it was such an honor for me to join on HR 1492, our Epic app, and continue to lead forward with Epic. It's this simple. We need to make sure that we're fighting and creating options. There should not be penalties, a pill penalty, but we need to actually continue to work. And I put it this way, I know we're slowly getting more information, more and more data is coming in. That's going to really help drive this home in terms of where investors are beginning to really just be hesitant of, making certain investments if, again, policy wise, we're not clear and providing that clarity. And I want to really highlight why Epic, and really paint the picture. Number one, it's right for jobs. Number two, when we talk about driving research and so forth. Number two, when we're able to actually continue to work in the space and meet people where they are in their lives. And think about this. It actually helps save taxpayer dollars in the end. Think about that. Not only that, but what I would also emphasize is the cure, getting to cures and, continue to making those meaningful investments to get to cures to help people in their lives. I mean, there's just so many reasons why this is the right direction to go. And guess what? We don't always get things right in life. And especially when we're dealing with massive policy. And sometimes there are just unintended consequences. And you just have to then come back and revisit those unintended consequences. And I believe that this just so happens to be one of those areas that we can go back and revisit. And we have to be clear about this. You can support Epic and still push to make sure we're bringing costs down. Those are not at odds with each other. They're not. So, my friends, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to help kick off this important panel. And I'm sure the panelists are going to have some really good information to share to all of the congressional offices who are represented, staff members. I know this, I get this. I have some of my team here today. We know you do a lot of the heavy lifting. So go back and speak really good words with members and let them know why this is just so important. And to each and every one of you that's here, the industry, to everybody, thank you so much. And I can end by saying this. I truly believe Epic is epic, y'all. All right.
I just need to know one thing, Congressman. Was HR 1492 deliberate? Because that was a great year of discovery. And we got to keep discovery going. Oh, they had innovation, right? There we go. We have to. So that's a good bill number. Thanks, sir. And the cute.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. And North Carolina is really representing in the with the Epic Act as well. Senator Tillis in the Senate has sponsored the companion legislation, and Congressman Murphy in the House is the lead sponsor and who is going to be with us, but has a conflict, so couldn't be here. But we have a message from Dr. Murphy speaking again on the EPIC Act. So why don't we roll that, Jake?
Hey guys, Congressman Murphy here. Thank you all so much for coming out today. I apologize I can't be there in person, but I want to share a few thoughts with you about the EPIC Act, the Ensuring Pathways for Innovative Cures Act, which tries to reverse the pill penalty put forth by the IRA. The price-fixing scheme of the IRA really has the secondary effects of really cutting research into what we call small molecules, or the pill forms, which is so crucial in today's medicine. I think research has shown that this funding now has been cut 70%. These are medications that really help with neurologic diseases, cancers, and so many other diseases. And it really thwarts the innovation that we've seen in the last decade and in the last 20 years in pharmaceutical research. The government does not need to pick winners and losers. And as a doctor, I want to be able to prescribe medications that people can take at home in their own environment rather than having to travel hours to come in and take infusions. I want to thank the We Work for Health for putting this out and sponsoring this event. This is critical that we have education and making sure that people understand what's going on. I think the tide is turning against what was done in the price-fixing scheme put forth by the IRA. I'm working hard on this because as a physician, I know how critical small molecules play in the future and the present day in medicine. So thank you all for coming out today. Thank you for support. We're going to get this done.
No, thank you very much. So there's the two lead sponsors of the legislation here in the House, and doing a great job. There's a lot of momentum for this legislation. A lot of co-sponsors have signed on, and if your office is considering that and you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask any of us up here. But you've already heard some really good arguments for why it's a much needed legislation to correct a fix. And I think it would do that. It does that in a relatively simple manner by putting the small molecule years of exclusivity from 9 up to 13 on parity with large molecule, and that would be a huge adjustment. So our panel has been very patient and sitting up here, but I want to have them introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the presentation from Dwayne and then the panel conversation. So Adina, why don't you talk to us about your background with the Alliance for Aging Research?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's an honor to present here today. I'm Adina Lasser. I serve as the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at the Alliance for Aging Research. We're a patient advocacy organization. We were founded in 1986, and our mission is to change the narrative to help older adults achieve healthy aging and equitable access to care. So I'm going to be talking a little bit today about the patient perspective, and I'm really excited to engage with all of you and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Adina. Next is Ipsita Smolinski, who's the founder and managing director of Capital Street. Ipsita.
Hi, Ipsita Smolinski, Capital Street. Thank you for having me. Look forward to the panel. Let's see, our firm was founded about 15 years ago, and we do health policy strategy consulting. We're based here in downtown DC. I came from JP Morgan, so have a bit of a Wall Street and finance background, but have been analyzing policy for a number of years. Really happy to talk about all of the sort of unintended consequences from the IRA, pill penalty, orphan designation. Happy to talk about broader topics as well. And yeah, thank you for having me. Just some other tidbits. I also teach at Georgetown. I'm on the faculty there. Thank you.
And Dwayne, you can introduce yourself from there or come on up here because I think you're next on the menu as well, which is solid fish. Yeah, so welcome to the stage, Dwayne Schultes from Vital Transformations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. Pleasure to be here. Really great opportunity to present the research that we've been working on. It was a huge monumental task because it required us to analyze 1,100 clinical trials individually and then determine what the lead assets were. And we have a peer-reviewed publication which has been approved. And if you see me checking my phone furiously, it's not that I'm being rude. I mean, no more than I'm normally rude. But it's the fact that the paper literally is in pre-production as we speak and is being laid out. So it's open access. We were hoping we'd have it out today. I've got 3 editors of the publication at Nature jamming on the editorial team saying, get this thing out. It's not out yet, but it will be. And we have the information. So next slide, please. So this is the release, the official release of the study. This is the actual title of the study. This is the DOI number. So you can search for this when it's live. It's open access. You can download it. You can see it. This is the publication. And like we said, it's approved, so we can talk about it. It's official. So next slide, please. Disclosure, a bunch of people paid for it. They didn't influence our opinion. In fact, they don't like a lot of what we say sometimes, but we say the truth. If anyone doesn't believe us, you can click on that link, and we always provide all of our raw data, always. So you folks can run, I'm sure you folks are going to be downloading our data and checking our math, and I appreciate that. And we always think that, we always show the results and bring the receipts. So by all means, you can grab the data and take a look yourselves. Next slide, please. Okay. How did I get into this racket? Why am I here? Well, about 20 years ago, I was working for the Wall Street Journal. I was at Dow Jones. I was an analyst in corporate development for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And in 2007, we had the great crisis, the great financial crisis. And what was interesting is we were looking at where are we going to put our money? And a couple of us at the firm were saying, what are we going to do? And what did we notice? We noticed a very interesting thing during the great financial crisis, the housing crisis, the dot-com crisis, the subprime mortgage crisis, really. What do you see? You see the NASDAQ Biotech Index actually was performing 50% better than the S&P 500. Biotech was a great hedge against the market downturn, a fantastic hedge. In fact, it was so good, it helped pay for my house. We invested a lot in biotech because it was countercyclic against the general market downturn. Now, what's really interesting, let's look at what happened during COVID in the last financial crisis, the interest rate crisis. What do you see? Something happens in Q3 of 2021, and you see that the biotech index drops below the general market trend. We'd never seen that before. Something happened in Q3 of 2021. I wonder what that was. Oh, it coincides with the introduction of the Build Back Better IRA Act when it was voted on in the Congress and it was passed. So fundamentally, the market behavior changed. Next slide, please. What do we see? If you look at what happened since the introduction of IRA, again in Q3 of 2021, we see a 35% drop in all clinical trial starts. Now, the CBO, Amitabh Chandra of Harvard, Rita Conti, Fred Ledley, all the academics have been saying, well, this is just an impact of the market. That's true if we can't show that behavior changes by exposure to Medicare and by molecule. And that's what we set out to do. We wanted to show that this drop was not just because of the market conditions, as CBO and Amitabh Chandra and very good academics were saying. We wanted to say, no, investors have fundamentally changed their behavior due to exposure to IRA. Next slide, please. Where do we start seeing it? Well, these are indications we would expect to see a lot of elderly patients. So these are neurological disorders. This is the whole class from all 1,100 clinical trials. So we see neurology and autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease is arthritis, for example. And what do you see? You see a complete move away in these classes from NME, that's new molecular entity, that's small molecules, to biologics, large molecules. Pill penalty, prices, small molecules for negotiation at year 9, whereas large molecules get 13 years. That 4-year difference represents 50% of the profitability of an investment. Check my math on that. Is that right? About 50%. Thank you. Okay. We have confirmation. That's fantastic. So the point is that if you're investing in a small molecule now and you're going to be subjected to the Inflation Reduction Act, you're going to lose about 40 to 60%, depending on the asset, of your profitability, your net present value. So what are we seeing? We're seeing asset classes where we'd expect to see a lot of small molecules moving 100% to large molecules. There are a couple others too, where we see entire indication classes swing after the IRA's introduction. Next slide, please. If we look at the aggregate amount of money, that means pile all the money together and count it. So this isn't individual or average or median. This is just, let's sum all the money together. What do we see? Well, at the peak, before the introduction of IRA, you had about, and this is phase 1 and phase 2 small companies, early stage companies, very, very small companies, early stage just getting started, where venture capital and angel investors play a big part. So we're looking at their lead assets. These are the assets that they're pushing forward and driving for investment to try and get to market. What do we see? If we look at the peak in 2021, before the introduction of IRA, there's roughly $2 billion in small molecules. That's the orange line. That drops by 68%, roughly 70%. So it's gone from $2 billion to $600 million of aggregate investment since the introduction of IRA. Now, what do you see in large molecules? Big dip as people retooled, kind of figured out what was going with IRA. And now That's now 10 times the investment we see in small molecules, $6 billion. So it's $6.4 billion in large molecules to $600 million now in small molecules for small companies under evaluation at $2 billion doing phase 1 and 2 research. That's an enormous shift. What's really interesting is, well, we'll show no more slides here, please. Next slide. We also see this rotation in just the raw numbers of clinical trials. When we did our first analysis on the Inflation Reduction Act, which we released at Bio in 2022 in Boston, we saw 75% of the IRA was consisting of small molecules, drugs that would be impacted. So 75% of the entire drug portfolio were small molecules. We're seeing an enormous shift in the quantity of clinical trials that are now being run. There's a huge bias now to early stage research to large molecules. And again, this is going to have an enormous impact on people who are of Medicare age. Next slide, please. What do we see here? These are all the indications that have over a midway point exposure to Medicare. What we found is that the average drug sold in the United States, 59% of the people who are going to get that drug are of Medicare age or older. So 65, that was our benchmark. So we said, okay, let's look for those indications that have over that median exposure. So more than 59%. So 60% and up of the population are half point, halfway on the curve, the older end. What are those indications? And what do you see? You see enormous drops. In fact, at the median, there's a 74% drop in aggregate investments by total class. So each of these classes of investments, when you look at them together, have dropped in total value by 74% at the median. These are enormous drops, huge drops. And where do we see particularly dementia gets almost zeroed out? And Lord knows we need more good dementia drugs. We absolutely do. So non-small cell lung cancer. I mean, these are really devastating numbers, and we really can see it in particular when you look at these classes, these specific indications with a high exposure to Medicare. Next slide, please. Now, this is where we basically can say the CBO is wrong, and Amitabh Chandra is wrong, and Reena Kanti is wrong. This is where we know they're wrong, because people are treating small molecules with a high exposure to Medicare fundamentally differently than they are with a low exposure to Medicare. We see investors changing their behavior based on exposure to the Medicare population. If you look at that top number and that top wavy line, those are the small molecules above the median exposure to Medicare. So it's above 59% of the population and up. So something like dementia is 90% of the drugs are going to sell or go to Medicare. Okay. So it's those drugs versus the ones that are lower than the median. And what do you see? You see a statistically different change. In fact, large molecules are now biased. We'll get to that. If you look at this, the high exposure to small molecules actually dropped statistically, whereas the ones with a low exposure to Medicare did not drop statistically. In fact, they increased slightly. So we see a complete difference in how investors are treating small molecules based on their exposure to the Medicare market. Next slide, please. Large molecules, we see no change at all. They basically, whether based on the exposure, it's exactly the same, roughly the same. It's 59% before IRA exposure to Medicare, 59% after IRA. There's no difference by exposure to Medicare and investment. None whatsoever. It doesn't change. So investors do not see exposure to Medicare and large molecules as a risk. Large molecules are less risky. Thus, they're changing their behavior and moving from small molecules with high exposure to large molecules. Next slide, please. We can do one other thing. We can take the exposure and then crank it up and then look at what happens. So let's say you start at that midpoint for Medicare and then you just slowly crank up the exposure. What does that do? You see a drop of 57%, half across the entire Medicare population as you crank up that exposure for small molecules. So every investment along that curve drops by 57%, roughly half. We cannot do this with large molecules. The difference is not statistically significant. We don't see the impact in large molecules. It's just in small molecules with a high exposure to Medicare. Next slide, please. We also see the change in investing. What would happen? So let's say we decide to put in the EPIC Act. What do you see? See this tail of all those little dots? Those are the companies that are going to be radically impacted. You notice as you go to 13 years, there's a lot fewer dots. Things get a lot smaller. You get less impact. It's actually, investments are going to be more available because you're not hurting the companies as much. It provides more liquidity and it removes that penalty. And you can see it visually As the dots get smaller and more clustered, you see less outliers here. Less companies get socked in the teeth. Next slide, please. In fact, we see roughly a 20 to 30% improvement in the amount of available drugs due to the EPIC Act. It would be better if you went to 15 years because most small molecules had 15 years before generic competition, but 13 is better than nothing. So, whoa, lost power. That's okay. You all can hear me, right? You don't need the microphone? Great. So essentially what you see is you get about a 20-30% improvement in the amount of drugs that are available with the EPIC Act. Now, it would be better to have 15 because that would get most small molecules back in the game. But in lieu of that, we'll take 13 because you're going to see a 20-30% improvement. Next slide, please. So here are the conclusions. Basically, rather than me read this, I'll just end with this one small point here. IRA was sold to the general public as a benefit for the Medicare age population. In fact, the bill is going to hurt the Medicare age population because they are going to see fewer new drugs. This is unequivocal. So whilst the intentions may have been good to make drugs cheaper, they will become cheaper because there will just be no new ones or very few new ones. We are seeing an exodus of innovation, particularly in areas where we need it, dementia in particular. This is a real problem. So I would implore all of you to use this evidence when it's finally out. I mean, it is available through the slide deck, but we hope to have the publication out imminently, and it will be public access. You can download it. This will be available on our website. You can send it out, use it. And if you have any questions, by all means, I look forward to taking them. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Dwayne. And if you left your email at the desk or wrote your email down when you walked in, we will send you the link to the study that Dwayne just referenced as soon as it hits. Of course, it could hit while we're sitting here. But he's checking right now. But it's imminent, we are told. So we'll make sure we get it to you because these are really important. This is really important new research. It talks about a number of things as the small molecule penalty that I'm going to speak on just for a minute, the impact on seniors, and then the kind of the BC behavior that Sita could speak to. So I'll start our panel conversation by adding to my background. Before I joined We Work for Health, I was the CEO of the Generic Drug Association, the Association for Accessible Medicines. Of course, the trade association for generics and biosimilars. The small molecule that you have now heard a dozen times or more, those are generic pills and tablets. Those are the most efficient medicines to take and also the most affordable medicines to take. So by creating this dichotomy of 9 years before government negotiation begins and 13 years, by creating that bridge, we're now seeing, that we're seeing the kind of the dirty underside of that is that it's impacting the small molecule. Why is that so important? For a few things, and you'll hear about many of them from the panel. First of all, ease of use. So your adherence, when it's a small molecule, your adherence is always higher than if you have to go to a clinician or to your physician or to a hospital for an injection or transfusion for large molecule drugs. So ease of use is one. It's preferred by seniors, but by most patients in general would rather just take a tablet than get an injection. There are clinical reasons, and I know Badina is going to speak to that, why they're preferred and why they react better in the body. But the one I'll spend more time on is the lost savings, the lost opportunity that you see because of the creating this dichotomy between 9 and 13 years. And I would say that CBO missed this as well when they were drafting the projections for the IRA specifically. So when there are 3 generic competitors in the same class, prices drop off the originator drug by up to 50%, 30 to 60%. I'll just say 50% roughly when there are 3 competitors. When there are 6 competitors in the small molecule market, it drops 60 to 80% off of the originator price. When there are 9 generics, if you think of statins, for example, a really busy class, which were, life-changing drugs for so many people, have saved millions of lives, prevented millions and millions of heart attacks. When there are 9 generics in that class now, there are more than 9, the price drops 90%, 85 to 95%. So with the government coming in and setting price by creating the maximum fair price, you will never see 5, 7, 9 drugs competing in a class. I would maintain you will never get that type of volume in any particular area because why? Because the government is now the competitor, not just the originator drug, but now you're also competing with the government that's setting a price. And when you're making your projections, if you're a generic company hoping to enter that space, your projections off of the originator price have been blown up because now you're competing against the government. So short-term prices might come down on that particular drug because the government has come in with a loaded gun on the table and said, let's negotiate. But the prices might come down initially because of that government negotiation. But long-term, you'll actually could potentially have higher prices because you will never have, like I said, multiple competitors in the class. So they could be actually more expensive than they would have been if they were left to just the natural competition that would take place in the market. So that's a key point that I want to drive on why this dichotomy between 9 and 13 is so important. And the last thing I'll say on one other point on this is that the 15 drugs that were announced in the most recent, by CMS in the most recent negotiation, the 15 drugs, most of them, majority of them are small molecule drugs. All 15 of those medications have generic or biosimilar drugs in development today. As we sit here today, there have been literally hundreds of filings with the FDA by companies who want to come in and be that follow-on competitor. They want to bring a generic or a biosimilar to the market and compete against those 15 fantastic originator drugs. But with the addition of now government negotiation, what we're going to see is those companies that would have come in and competed are going to say thanks, but no thanks. So they will take a pass in many instances on that. So they may drop their efforts, and now what they'll see, we would not only be competing with the originator product, but now competing with the federal government on price as well. So that's another, I would say, a perverse impact or an unforeseen, unintentional, but I would say highly predictable consequence of the 9 to 13 discrepancy in the IRA. And that is why the EPIC Act, which just brings the 9-year up to 13, puts them back to parity. And I think that it is much needed fix to this legislation. I'll stop there and we'll go down and hear from Adina.
Yeah, thank you. So Dwayne and Dan have already laid out how the pill penalty is impacting investments in treatments and conditions that disproportionately impact older adults. I want to take a couple of minutes to focus on what that actually looks like in practice and why it matters for the people that all of you serve. So taking a step back for a minute, most known medicines today, as we've already kind of talked about, are small molecule drugs. These are drugs that the pharmacy can fill for you for pickup or delivery, and that in most cases a patient can take with a glass of water. For older adults specifically, oral medications like these are often the safest and most manageable option. Excuse me. That's especially true for individuals with mobility limitations, vision impairment, or other chronic conditions that already require complex care. Taking a pill with a glass of water is a fundamentally different experience than calling up your physician, making an appointment, traveling to your office, waiting there potentially for hours until your clinician's available, and then having to sit through the treatment itself through an IV or an injection. That shift from pill to infusion doesn't just add complexity, it creates real access barriers. And those barriers fall hardest on older Americans who may already struggle to get appointments or to coordinate home care. There's also a scientific reality here. Large molecule biologics, the kind that require infusion, sometimes can't cross what's known as the blood-brain barrier, which is a collection of cells that protect your brain from unfamiliar substances. And that means that these drugs might not work as well. Oh, okay. Might not work as well for treating neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or certain brain cancers. And so we really don't want to stunt small molecule drug development that could help us address those conditions. The research presented here today on the IRA's impact on medical breakthroughs deeply concerns us at the Alliance for Aging Research, and we hope that it concerns you as well. before the negotiated prices even go into effect. They have not gone into effect yet in January. This analysis shows that research dollars have already significantly shifted away from small molecule therapies that target the Medicare age population, including in Alzheimer's disease, non-small cell lung cancer, head and neck cancer, stroke, renal cell cancer, bladder cancer, cerebral edema, and others. I'm sure that many of us in this room have had relatives with one or more of those conditions. This is also about supporting how older adults want to age. The vast majority of older adults want to stay in their homes and maintain their independence for as long as they possibly can. Oral medications support that goal. They're easier to use, they don't require travel, and fundamentally, they reduce strain on caregivers, which are you and me, who are taking care of our parents or our loved ones, our grandparents. And that has implications also for our health system writ large. This means fewer emergency room visits, less facility-based care, better adherence, and better outcomes. The EPIC Act helps to ensure that new treatments are developed in ways that actually match how older adults live and want to live. There's also a cost angle here, which I know my colleagues have mentioned. Moving a drug from pill to injection can often increase total healthcare spending, not just beneficiary spending, but broad system level spending. This is not because the drug is better, but because it introduces more billing opportunities. And that can mean higher out of pocket costs or more frequent copays, unexpected facility fees. And for Medicare beneficiaries on fixed incomes, that can be the difference between buying your medication or buying your groceries or having to skip a dose or just overall non adherence. At the end of the day, this is about what kind of innovation we want to incentivize. And we've learned from my colleagues on this stage that the scientific landscape will shift based on the decisions that are made here on the Hill. We want to ensure that scientific innovation is not hampered by regulatory burdens or perverse incentives. Older adults deserve treatments that reflect their needs, not legal loopholes or profit-maximizing delivery models. Passing the EPIC Act would signal that patients and Medicare beneficiaries remain at the forefront of our decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you, Adina. And now to hear from the investor standpoint, Ipsita.
Great. So a couple things. I just wanted to echo what Dan was saying about sort of that small molecule versus large molecule. It's a pill. You have better sort of medication adherence, right? With a pill versus an injectable medicine. And for cancer, we heard from Dwayne about sort of cancer, neurology, behavioral health, cardiovascular. Those are some of the, I would say, therapeutic categories that are impacted by this 9 and 13 disparity. But I guess what I would say is just to kind of flesh out how oncology drug development happens. Often what happens is companies, sponsors are testing their medicine in perhaps a smaller indication. Maybe that's head and neck cancer. Maybe that's ovarian cancer, right? To get that third or fourth or fifth line indication. Then they're able to continue to study that medication in perhaps a bigger indication. And the reason why that's important is because that 9 years starts when you're looking at those smaller indication and getting a third or fourth or fifth line indication, meaning you're not the first medicine at the top of the list that physicians are prescribing. So that 9 years comes up quickly. Dave Ricks at Eli Lilly has talked about this. Companies at ASCO, which is a major cancer medical meeting in Chicago every June. I remember the first ASCO meeting right after the IRA passed. Another CEO, I want to say from Genentech, and again, this is public on the record, said, look, we're going to be incentivized to go into larger indications like prostate cancer versus something smaller like ovarian because of the IRA. So, companies are pivoting their portfolios, Bristol, Pfizer, AbbVie, et cetera, to complex biologics. They've said that all very publicly on their earnings calls with shareholders, et cetera. Pfizer comes to mind as a company that said that by 2030, a majority of their revenues they expect to come from large molecules, ADCs, which are antibody drug conjugates, and bispecifics, which are proteins. So, just to give you a sense of kind of what's happening out in kind of the biotech and pharma world. As the IRA rolls forward, particularly with negotiation, we have our first 10 drugs that were announced, right, with The MFPs, the maximum fair prices, that probably weren't too bad. The expectation is that the prices go lower in the out years, so sort of 2027, 2028. Um, and, another impact I would talk about to the innovation ecosystem is if you are a company and say you have a medicine that is potentially at risk for being negotiated via the IRA, um, as you're in M&A or mergers and acquisitions, discussions with other companies, maybe it's a bigger pharma company, it's a risk. If they see that you have a medicine that could potentially be negotiated by CMS, by the Medicare program, then, it kind of halts the discussion right there. So that's a key sort of flow of capital for these smaller biotech companies and even larger biotech companies, and pharma companies. So those are two things I just wanted to mention. Happy to take any questions as we proceed with the discussion.
Thank you so much. So we are going to just have a little dialogue up here, but I would encourage anyone who has a question, please just raise your hand, very informal, and we'll for anyone on the panel. But I'll start. One of the glaring questions that comes to mind immediately would be what was and there probably maybe people in this room who can answer this too, but what was the original intent in creating a difference between small molecule and large molecule? That's 9 to 13 dichotomy that has created such an uproar. I have my thoughts on that, but Dwayne, you want to give us your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, the biologic class didn't exist 20 years ago, right? It was a relatively new phenomena. They were just put under the same pathway under FDA. And then there was a growing understanding, particularly around the prescription drug benefit in 2004, that we needed to have some segmentation between hospital injectable products based on, essentially Medicare and hospital versus, the prescription drug benefit for Part D. And then there were also discussions as this sector basically was an American sector. The first biotech company was Genentech in 1977 in San Francisco. U.S. invented it. And, we're mimicking human processes. It was like, well, that's not really a pill. It's not a chemical. A new molecular entity, a small molecule, is actually listed in the chemical journal. You can actually, find them. They're actually patented by a chemical action, whereas a biologic has a very different mechanism. Plus, it's a longer industrial process. It's much more difficult. It takes about $400 million to scale up even for a biosimilar when you look at the failure rate. I mean, it was a very different pathway. It was deemed around the time that they were putting in the biologic, the purple book in the FDA, that this would be a separate division with separate timelines. So as I understood it, that's how that was done. It was part of the negotiation in setting up the biologic class as a regulatory class here in the United States.
We're going to be more cynical than that. I think the other thing was going and working on the Hill. You understand the impact of the CBO, but I think it was driven by the CBO kind of putting a number first. Here's the number we need to hit, and to get there, they needed to use the fluctuation between the number of years before government negotiation and that's that. I believe that's what created that. I would call it an artificial discrepancy between the small molecule and large molecule. But again, the EPIC Act would take care of that and would bring them back to parity. And I think we would see a real turnaround. I mean, open to the panel, but I think in my mind, what we would see is a pretty rapid turnaround where some older habits would prevail, and we go back to, okay, if small molecule is now a safe bet, we'll go back there. I had a question, Ipsita, based on, and tell us what your thoughts are on this. But we're in such a kind of a crazy time right now in markets. So investors typically they want to know what's happening. They want security. They're willing to take a bet, obviously. But in such an environment that is challenged as it is now, does something like this make it even more likely that VC money will shy away from small molecule and because of the current environment?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, well, the first thing you learn on the very first day of business school is that the markets do not like uncertainty. So, we're in this sort of unprecedented era of tariffs. We know that a pharmaceutical tariff is coming likely, right? Who knows what the details are? We've got a Section 232 investigation ongoing, and we'll learn whatever we learn from the president and the White House in the coming days and weeks. So, right now, it's just been an extremely volatile market. I'm sure you have looked at your investment accounts and perhaps maybe no longer want to look. I would expect that volatility to continue. And by the way, we don't make stock recommendations. I'm just merely commenting on the markets, which right now are very much impacted by policy. Pharmaceuticals, interestingly, have kind of hung in there, sort of in this first quarter, year to date. I think a lot of it is because tech companies have kind of hiccuped Apple, Nvidia, et cetera. But, you know, those are sort of bigger things right now. We also have major staffing reductions at the FDA. There's a lot of concern from biotech and pharma companies about, are their applications going to get approved? Things are in phase 2 and phase 3. So there's a concern that user fee reviews are going to slow down, which I think could be the case. And, the agency may be skeletal now, but I think folks will be hired and, we'll kind of ameliorate that. And this is just, sort of the 9 to 13 is one more, I think, thing that would probably assuage investors, companies to get that fix. I think investors are hopeful that it will happen. It feels like reconciliation is the main legislative vehicle in town right now. And could it be attached to that? Maybe, maybe not. There's a cost to the bill, of course, which I think is something that would have to be addressed. But yeah, it's all sort of hair on fire right now for investors. And the EPIC Act would help.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one, Jake, go back to slide 12, and I'm going to turn to Adina, and you reference these in your comments, but that one right there. So this, because there's a lot of data on this slide, I think it's important if you can all see it, what actually is happening in the real world to some of these conditions that skew towards senior citizens. So, how do you, and I know you covered it, but what are your thoughts on what's really going on in Alzheimer's and in non-small cell and in dementia? If your constituency were to see this, what do you think the reaction would be?
I think they would be scared. Is it? Okay.
It's totally.
Concerned, scared. I think, when we talk about patients, we talk a lot about unmet need, right? And those are conditions with a lot of unmet need. Alzheimer's disease, the first disease-modifying therapies ever were just released in the last 3 years. And they're not a catch-all. And there's, some kind of symptomatic relief that we can do, but it's very scary if, as many of us know, if our grandparent is diagnosed or our parent is diagnosed. These are, I think, when we talk about what investment does for the patient, it gives them hope. And I think that loss of hope, or loss, especially based on kind of impractical, artificial decision making, is we need hope, and we need to keep that going. Yeah.
And I think to reinforce that point, Dwayne, you have a slide and you didn't reference it, but some of the investments that were made, some big bets that were placed, actually were going to conditions not for seniors.
Yeah, it's part of the drive of the large molecules, why they've gone up so much, is we're seeing some really atypical large bets in the large molecule biologics. And when you actually break those out, they're really in indications that are far below the median. They're either at the median exposure to Medicare or skew to the left. They're in orphan indications, pediatric indications. So again, we're just not seeing the traction, even in the biologics early stage. There is some evidence that investors are willing to make the big bets in the biologics, but they're still kind of avoiding the exposure. Because if you look at the biologic portfolio, there's been a lot of hemming and hawing, particularly in this building, about Humira and about how it had this monopoly extended till 21 years. But if you look at rituximab, that had 21 years. If you look at Herceptin, that's another biologic, that had 20 years. And what happened in all those cases? Herceptin's priced, now that there's an effective biosimilar in the market, it's dropped 70%. Humira's price, there's 9 biosimilars that were approved last year. Yes, AbbVie still has an enormous amount of the market share, but the price has dropped 45% in 1 year. I mean, the markets kind of work. I mean, you don't like the length of it. Okay, that's one thing. That's a Hatch-Waxman discussion. That's a regulatory discussion on intellectual property. I mean, what we've done here is we've pinned a Hatch-Waxman balloon, Mickey Mouse ear on a balloon of pricing, which makes no sense to me. If you want to deal with the length of patent, then deal with the length of patent, but don't do it through price fixing in Medicare. It's just really weird.
Yeah, and our analysis would echo that sort of this move towards pediatric, basically diseases of the non-elderly, immunology, um, orphan. Absolutely, that's correct. And, as a point of reference, early stage trials, I mean, we're making decisions now. Companies are making decisions now that really aren't going to play out for 10, 12, 15 years, given the length of time it takes to get through preclinical phase 1, 2, 3 of the FDA, right? So, a lot of these decisions are being made now, but they're really pivoting in that direction.
And this is yeah, 100%. And one of the other things about this, if you listen to some of the discussions, when Director General Swagel of CBO wrote his letter in December of 2023 refuting the committee I was on, the Healthcare Task Force of the House Budget Committee, we had a meeting. Myself, Peter Kolchinsky was there, Doug Holtz-Eakin was there, Congressman Burgess was there, and Congressman Arrington as well. And Chip Roy popped in for a little bit too. And what was interesting, the feedback on that letter was, well, we see no evidence of venture capital dropping because the venture capital numbers we pulled in Crunchbase look fine. Now, she's probably smiling when I mention Crunchbase because it doesn't look at venture capital or angel at all. It's just publicly held deals. And they were including as venture capital the Pfizer acquisition of Seagen for $43 billion. That is not a VC deal. Essentially, what we've got are a bunch of people here who think that anything that's bought at the major end by major pharma is venture capital. No, those are mature trees. The Pfizer's buying a company. They're cutting down a mature tree to build lumber. What we've got to be looking at are the seedlings and who's planting the seedlings and what type of trees are going to be grown. And we're seeing a lot less seedlings and the type of wood has changed. So that's the problem. We've fundamentally changed the market. It's kind of broken with IRA for the elderly and the seniors. That's the problem.
And I just want to add that, when we're talking about unmet need and kind of where we go from here, it's one thing if we need to go and get an infusion and we live in DC in an incredible metropolis near a health center, right? I can walk 15 minutes and access some of the best healthcare in the world. It's another thing entirely if I'm an older adult in a rural community and I have to drive 45 minutes even to get to my doctor's office or the closest hospital. So that's another major consideration of if I can just have my meds delivered to me in a pill form, and I live in that, we want to make sure that there's equitable access as much as we can. And so that kind of urban versus rural space is another real consideration.
Absolutely. Access is a critical issue. I'll just pile on the excellent point that Dwayne made about Humira and the biosimilar drop 45% with multiple 5 or 6, 7 competitors in that space now. Still not what you would have seen in small molecule. You'll see 6, 75, 80, 90% drop in price. So biosimilars are great. But if we shift the whole paradigm from small molecule pills and tablets to the biosimilars, yeah, you will never see the same level of savings as we would otherwise. Are there any questions in the room? Because we're about at time, but we have, yeah, please.
Do you have any examples of biologics that were available in pill form?
The answer is no. If they're a pill form, they're a small molecule. Generally, it's a chemical entity that's stable. But what you are seeing are, and investors are saying it, they are favoring, how do I say this diplomatically? There is a bias right now for people, if they can change the modality from small molecule to large molecule early stage, they are saying this would be better if it's a large molecule. So we are biasing the pathway to drugs that are injectable biologics. That is just, it's going the other way. Yeah, unfortunately. Because we've incentivized it, of course. If you want something, you want more of something, subsidize it. And that's essentially what you've done. You've created an incentive to go to biologics. Well, I think right now, horses for courses, okay? Biologics are generally larger molecules, so they have specific purposes that mimic biologic actions. Small molecules are chemical entities that work through your bloodstream. So they go through and they attach chemically to stuff. So they're different modalities. They're different mechanisms of action.
And by the way, they're also like you can have an injectable drug like a semaglutide, GLP-1, Wegovy, Ozempic, etc. That's a small molecule, even though it's injectable because of the amino acid count. So, we're talking about all small molecules being oral and all biologics being injectable or infused, but there's definitely some nuance. There's nuances in there.
Okay, so good question.
Any other questions? Well, hopefully you got the message today that there are flaws in this component of the IRA that have created a really perverse environment that's hurting seniors. And now we have the data. This study shows that we're seeing a huge drop off in really critical research that impacts seniors. And then the small molecule to large molecule differential is needs to be fixed, and the EPIC Act is the legislative fix that I think we're talking about, and would really go a long way to repair this this error. So we really appreciate everybody coming. Um, a lot of this data and a lot of this study will also be on our website. We Work for Health. Also, Ipsita mentioned some of the companies and what they've been saying and decisions that they've have made. We keep a quote bank, if you will, or a database of CEOs and other folks who made comments that they've made business decisions to move from point A to point B, or to move away from small molecule. You can go on our website, and it's that's all kept there too. So that might be a good resource for you. But thanks for coming. Stick around, have some more to eat. But we appreciate it. Come on up if you have any additional questions. But thank you very much.